They call me a legend now, a ghost of the frontier, etched in stone and tale, but I was just a man, one who heard the wild calling louder than any sermon, who found more truth in the rustle of the leaves than in the echo of the chapel. My name is Daniel Boone, and if you truly want to know me, you must walk with me through the forest of my memory, where each tree stands for a moment in a life that was carved from the wilderness itself. I was born on a bitter day in the fall of 1734, the sixth child in a Quaker family of 11. Our home was nestled in the Pennsylvania woods, not far from the banks of the Schuylkill River. My father, Squire Boone, was a weaver by trade, but a woodsman by blood. He taught me the language of the land, how to read the tracks in the mud, how to listen for the cry of a distant bird, how to watch the wind. These lessons were not written in books, but burned into the skin and bone of a boy who spent more time in the forest than by the hearth. I never took well to school. The walls closed in on me. While other boys were learning to spell their names, I was learning how to move like a shadow and shoot like lightning. By the age of 10, I could bring down a deer with a single shot. I didn't do it for sport. We needed meat, and I understood early that the world gives only to those who know how to take without waste. The forest became my school, my church, my truth. When I was still a boy, we left Pennsylvania for the Yadkin Valley in North Carolina. That journey, hundreds of miles in creaking wagons with rifles always ready, hardened me. We crossed rivers without bridges, climbed hills with no trails, slept with the howls of wolves for lullabies. But I loved every mile of it. The further we went, the less the land bore the mark of man, and the more it felt like home. In 1755, I joined General Braddock's campaign during the French and Indian War. I was just past 20 summers, young and full of fire. The war taught me many things: that men die easily, that orders are often foolish, and that the wilderness respects no uniform. I survived Braddock's disastrous march on Fort Duquesne, but I left that battlefield with more questions than glory. I returned to the Yadkin Valley, married my beloved Rebecca Bryan, and tried to settle down. We built a cabin, raised a family, but the pull of the unknown gnawed at me. I could not stay where the land was already tamed. I craved the untouched, the untamed, the promise of something beyond the next ridge. When I heard tales of a paradise west of the Appalachians across the Cumberland Gap, I knew I had to see it. In the spring of 1769, I crossed the gap for the first time. The journey was not easy. Thick forests, treacherous ridges, and the constant threat of attack from Shawnee warriors, who rightly saw us as intruders. I traveled with a small party of men, tough and silent, all of us driven by the same hunger for land, freedom, and the vastness of the unknown. We called it Kentucky, a word that tasted like promise and danger. It was a land of rolling hills, dense forests, and clear rivers, untouched by the plow or the axe. I thought I had found Eden, but Eden had its serpents. In the fall, we were attacked. I was captured by the Shawnee and forced to march for days. They spared my life but warned me never to return. I escaped with little more than a knife and my resolve, and made my way back through the frozen wilderness. It took weeks, but I returned alive, thinner, colder, but more determined than ever. Despite the danger, I returned again and again. I brought others with me, families who dared to dream of a new life in Kentucky. In 1775, I carved out a trail through the Cumberland Gap, a path that would become the Wilderness Road. I led 30 men, and together we hacked through thickets, crossed rivers, and stared down death more times than I care to count. When we finally reached the Kentucky River, we built Fort Boonesborough, a refuge in a sea of wilderness. But peace never came easy. The land did not give itself freely. In 1778, I was once again taken by the Shawnee. They treated me better this time, perhaps out of respect or curiosity. They even adopted me, giving me the name Sheltawee, Big Turtle. I lived among them for months, learning their ways, eating their food, watching the rhythms of a people far older than our colonies. I did not hate them. They were fighting for what was theirs. I escaped only when I learned of a planned attack on Boonesborough. I traveled nearly 200 miles in under 5 days to warn the settlers. My feet bled, my stomach was empty, but I arrived in time. We held the fort against the siege, muskets firing, walls shaking. They came in waves, and we pushed them back each time. That victory became legend, but it came with a price. Many questioned my loyalty, accused me of sympathizing with the Shawnee. Even friends turned their eyes from me. It wounded me deeper than any arrow. Years passed and the frontier kept moving west. As settlements grew, I found myself once again surrounded by fences, laws, and petty disputes over land claims. I never cared much for legal matters. Paper and ink meant nothing to me compared to sweat and soil, but that indifference cost me dearly. I lost thousands of acres to schemers and slick-tongued men who understood courtrooms better than forests. By the time I reached my 60th year, I had moved beyond Kentucky, chasing the edge of the map once more. I settled in Missouri, though we still called it Spanish Louisiana at the time. The Spanish governor, knowing my name, granted me land and welcomed me as a hero. It felt strange to be honored for simply doing what I had always done: wander, build, protect, and then move on. Now I sit in the twilight of my years, my hands calloused and scarred, my eyes dimmed but still restless. I have buried children, seen empires rise, and watched the stars shift over new lands. I have walked where no white man had walked before, and shared fires with those who had walked there for centuries. They called me a pioneer, a pathfinder, even a myth. But I was only ever a man, a stubborn, flawed, determined man, who chose the path where others saw only forest. And though the world grows tamer with each passing day and the wild places shrink beneath the plow and the saw, I know that somewhere, beyond the next river, the frontier still waits, silent, patient, eternal. As the seasons turned and the years wore down the bark of my life, I began to understand that the true wilderness was not only in the forests and mountains, it was in the hearts of men. The world changed faster than I could walk it, and I found myself more often as a stranger than a hero. The frontier I once carved with rifle and axe became a courtroom battleground of ink and signatures, deeds and taxes. After I settled in Missouri, still known as Spanish Louisiana when I arrived, I hoped for quiet. Not idleness, mind you, for I never could sit long without purpose. But I longed for a place where I would not have to fight for my own land, where the trees still stood tall and the rivers ran wide and unclaimed. The Spanish governor welcomed me with gifts and praise. He granted me 10,000 arpents of land near the Femme Osage Creek, and I, already in my twilight years, began anew. I built a cabin, smaller than the last, but warm and full of spirit. Rebecca, my steadfast partner in all things, stood beside me as she always had, through hunger and siege, birth and burial, with strength that rivaled any man's. We were older now, our children grown, our faces marked by time and trials, and yet even in the dusk of life we found joy, in the sound of a fire crackling, in the laughter of grandchildren, in the scent of wildflowers that grew untamed behind the house. I spent those years hunting and trapping as I had always done. I taught younger men the ways of the forest, how to track, how to move silently, how to read the land like a living map. My sons and grandsons became skilled woodsmen in their own right. Yet I could see in their eyes the same thing I saw in the eyes of settlers who came west in droves, a hunger for land, not for living with it, but for owning it. Fences began to rise even here, and with them came laws and disputes. After the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, the land I had been given by the Spanish was suddenly under American jurisdiction. Once more, I found myself without clear title to my home. Once more, I was forced to prove I had a right to the ground beneath my feet. They called me a hero, a founder of Kentucky, a living symbol of American grit, and yet they took my land with cold precision. I petitioned Congress, and after years of waiting, they granted me less than half of what I had lost. I accepted it, not with joy, but with resignation. I suppose that is the irony of a pioneer's life. We open the door, and others walk through it, with their laws, their judges, their towns. They pave the roads we once blazed with blood and sweat. They forget the silence that once ruled these hills. They forget the danger, the solitude, the thrill of not knowing what lay beyond the next bend in the river. But I never forgot. Even as my bones grew brittle and my hands trembled, I would ride out alone into the woods, if only to smell the pine and hear the wind moving through the branches. Once, when I was near 80, I tracked a black bear for over a day. My family thought I was mad, chasing beasts when I should be sitting by the fire. But it was not the bear I was chasing. It was myself, the version of me that once ran through these forests without fear or hesitation. I never did catch that bear, but I caught something else. The last breath of freedom, the last whisper of the untamed world. I buried my beloved Rebecca in 1813. She had been my anchor, my fire, my constant. Without her, the cabin grew quieter, the nights longer. I spoke more with the wind than with people, and perhaps they thought me fading. But I was not gone, not yet. I still had stories to tell, memories to press into the earth like footprints. In those final years, many came to visit. Writers, soldiers, politicians, all eager to speak with Daniel Boone, the pioneer, the legend. Some brought gifts, others brought questions. They wanted to know how it felt to be the first, to walk through untouched lands, to carve out homes in the unknown. I answered as best I could, but I often wondered what they were truly asking. Were they looking for the truth or for a version of me that fit their myth? I never saw myself as a hero. I made mistakes, many. I trusted the wrong men, took land that belonged to others, fought wars that were not always just. I watched friends die beside me, held children in my arms as they passed from fever or hunger. I did what I could with what I had, guided by instinct more than doctrine. What I know is this: the land remembers. Long after men forget, the rivers still run, the stones still sit where they have always sat. I have walked over mountains that seemed eternal, only to return years later and find them split with roads. I have seen forests vanish, their silence replaced by the clang of hammers and wheels, and yet I believe that somewhere the wild still breathes. When my time came, I was not afraid. I had lived through war and peace, through joy and grief, and I had always walked forward. I asked only that I be buried next to Rebecca, and though time has since moved our bones, first in Missouri, then later to Kentucky, I like to think our spirits never left that quiet patch by the creek, where the trees still whisper and the stars still burn. I do not expect to be remembered as a perfect man. I was stubborn, often reckless, and too quick to leave rather than to stay. But I hope I am remembered as one who listened to the land, to the wind, to the truth beneath the noise of civilization. I hope that when the last road ends and the last fire burns low, someone will still walk into the forest and feel what I felt, not fear, but possibility. For the frontier is not a place, it is a spirit, a way of seeing the world not as it is, but as it could be, if only we are brave enough to keep walking. And I walked far, farther than most, and though I now rest, the path remains.